My name is Mr. Burnett. I've taught here for a few years, and today I'm going to talk about teacups and feedback. Every year with American Studies, I start off, and the very first article I have them read is all about teacups. And the first article I read is called How to Land Your Children in Therapy. And it goes on to talk about how when students are given false positive feedback all their life, they turn out to actually be messed up people. So when actually they are faced with real problems, they get defensive, they get stressed out, they shut down, and they don't know how to react. So I started thinking about that issue, and I like that article. So today I'm going to talk about the need for evaluation and feedback for teachers, parents, and administrators. Now, I'd first like to talk a little bit about what I think feedback should look like and what the reason is, and why we should have feedback. Whenever we talk about feedback and evaluation, we talk about that piece of what if it's negative? What if it hurts their feelings? But then I realized I was just grading an essay recently. I graded about 60 of them over spring break, and I looked at the number of negative comments I made in one essay. There's between 5 and 7 pieces of negative feedback I would give per student. They would get 1 or 2 things they do well, but mostly it's negative. And I started realizing all of you live in a world of negative feedback. Yes, once in a while the teacher will say we did well, but mostly they're giving you negative feedback. But for some reason, the other 3 stakeholders at SAS, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, don't get that feedback. They don't get all the negative, they don't get all the positive. Now, I would argue that getting that negative and that positive feedback is the most important part of being a stakeholder at this school. Right now, I'm taking some courses at Purdue, and one of the courses I'm taking is on administration, and they talked about evaluation. And they said if you have poor evaluation practices, you will cripple your school. And I could argue that part of the problem at our school is that we have poor evaluation of teachers, administrators, and parents. We do fine with you. You guys get a pretty good amount of feedback, positive and negative, over the years. Now, why do we need it? The reason is though the negative feedback does occur, and though it might actually hurt your feelings, that's actually not the reason why you have evaluation and feedback. You need to have it for all the positives. The one thing I cannot stand is blanket praise and blanket criticism. I will not say you're the best class I've ever had, or you're the worst class I ever had, or you all did great on your test, or you all did poorly on your test. The reality is I hate that hyperbolic garbage. I hate giving absolutes. Because whenever I hear that, I say, wait a second, I'm not the same as everyone here. I hate the notion of equality. I am not equal to anyone else. I am beneath a lot of people in a lot of ways, and I'm above a lot of people in a lot of ways. I am not equal. Okay, and I realize that's the reality we live in. So I want to know, and here's the positive evaluation, I want to know who are the exemplars. I want to know who are the best administrators, the best teachers, who are the best parents. They need to know who they are because they have exemplary behavior. Those behaviors need to be recognized so that others can actually learn from them. When I coach sports, I bring the guy who knows how to shoot, and I show everyone how to watch him. If you think about all the times you've been in some sort of visual performing arts, I assume they would show you the exemplar. Why don't we do that here? We instead live in this culture of fear where we don't actually give positive or negative feedback. We give no feedback at all. We live in a culture of being too nice. That is bad. If you give negative feedback and positive, people start trusting you more. The people who have been in my class, the students I've had before, they will probably tell you that I am the most critical of them they've ever had, and I'm also probably, hopefully, the most complimentary. Also, I rip apart myself more than any teacher they know. Fairly raw, all my faults. They also hopefully see that I have 1 or 2 strengths. So, what needs to occur then? What needs to occur is we need to develop a strong evaluation system. And what that system can look like is I believe it needs to have a few components. First, it must have the component of choice. You need to give a few different data points, 5, 6, 7 data points. Those data points for teachers, parents, and administrators could be student focus groups. They could be student surveys. They could be, you actually have to take a test on content. Imagine if an administrator had to take a test on what they know. Imagine if a teacher had to take a test on what they know. Imagine if parents had to take a test on what they know about good parenting. Imagine what that would look like. How would they do? Let's look at some other possible metrics. They actually could be observed by others. Imagine if during a counselor conversation that a parent was having with a counselor, another parent was watching and observing and giving them feedback about the kind of feedback they gave to the counselors. Imagine if there were teachers inside of classrooms giving feedback on other teachers. Imagine if an administrator watched how the administrator dealt with their faculty and students and gave feedback. Imagine what that would look like. Now, once you have these 6 or 7 different data points, let's let the person who's being evaluated, let them decide which 3 they want to actually use. You know what? I want to use student focus groups. I want to use a little bit about my content knowledge, and I want to use that one observation I had. Now, if you allow one other option, let's say you allow an option 8, the person being evaluated could actually decide, you know what? I have such a unique position at this school, I want to be evaluated by another criteria. I want to be evaluated based on how well I actually make people feel. I feel like I make them feel better about themselves. So I would like to maybe take an emotional survey of my students. So if you allow everyone that other option, if they get to create another data point, that's great. Now, for the teacher, for the parent, for the administrator who cannot find 3 data points for why they add value, that is a very good conversation to have. If you look at all this data and you see nothing good about yourself, that might be a good place to start that you need to do some revisiting. Now, if you do actually have, when you bring your 3, now I would assume that most people, 95% of the people, 95% of the teachers, students, parents, and administrators are doing a good job. They have exemplary behaviors all the time. But it's very important that we actually talk about those. Now, why do you want to talk about those good behaviors? Once we start knowing about those, people can then actually start learning from them, and that's very key. Now, another piece, once you actually have these, you have to decide, what do I do with this data? What do I do? I would argue you actually have to meet with a person, and this is the hardest part. You actually have to talk to them and make some sort of plan for them. Help them reflect, help them set some goals. How many of you spend time after the test talking about the test? Okay, some of you do, some of you don't. Some of you solely look at the test, you get it back, and you look at the person next to you, and you see how they did. And you then assess yourself based on if you're better or worse than them. Well, if you're sitting with stupid kids, your grade looks pretty good. If you're sitting with smart kids, you look like you're pretty bad. The bottom line is you need to see how you're doing and self-reflect. So teachers need to teach you how to self-reflect. It needs to be a long process. Now, let's look at individually the different groups. Let's look at, first of all, parents and how this would actually look. Now, some people ask parents, whoa, did you just say parents should be evaluated? Well, do parents play a role in your education? It's kind of odd that there are many parents that play a huge role in your education. Think about that choosing a class process. Do they play a role in your education? Oh my. I would argue they play a huge role. Do they ever get assessed for that role that they play? At a school we went to in New York last year, I went to a place called St. Anne's. When you apply to St. Anne's, you have to fill out a form saying you will not communicate with the teachers while you are at school. The parents don't talk to the teachers. There's just full trust that the teachers know what they're doing and you don't talk. And at the end of it, teachers give full anecdotal feedback. If you don't like that, you don't go to that school. Now at this school, that's unrealistic. I wouldn't want that. There's a lot of valuable feedback a parent can give. But you need to see what would that look like? Should you have parents filling out surveys? Could you have maybe other parents say, you know what, I see what you're talking about when you're recommending these AP courses or you're recommending this history of film class, this music class. Have you thought of maybe asking your child what they like to do first? Imagine what that would look like. Okay, imagine if they actually had to, in addition to taking tests, they had to also get feedback from counselors. After they met with the counselor, they then stopped and said, so how did I do? How was I in that conference? Did I act like I care about my child more than me? Was that obvious that I cared about them most? Imagine if they spent time with that. Now, the next group is teachers. But before I get to teachers, this book I'm reading right now by a gentleman named Peterson called Teacher Evaluation, he said the most important group to evaluate when you're evaluating teachers is administrators. And I reread that chapter and I'm like, pardon me? And it said that you will cripple your school if you don't evaluate administrators first. How can they create a culture of reflection if they are not willing to reflect upon their own successes and failures? They need to be able to admit, I erred here, and here's my improvement plan. One of the greatest things you can gain when you're trying to teach people is you can gain empathy. You need to know that they're going through the same personal growth that you're going through. If they take a risk, you will take a risk. So I would argue that before you evaluate teachers, you have to evaluate administrators. Now let's look at teachers. Okay, a few years ago, my American Studies class, they alone created this incredibly dynamic teacher review tool. Now there's this belief that you guys cannot evaluate teachers, that you would care so much about popularity or you'd care about grade inflation or something, that you guys are not valuable sources. Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. To think that you don't already talk about teachers outside a classroom is just naive. You already evaluate teachers all the time. So why not actually create some sort of metric, which my students did, in which you actually evaluate teachers. Now, this had 35 points, and it actually had a bunch of comments. I read it. It was the most painful Friday of my year. It was horrible, okay? Because no one likes to hear that you talk too fast. Really? That's not a big deal. What about, it seems like you like some kids more than others. It seems like you like the outgoing kids, but the quiet kids you ignore. It seems like you only care about the males. It seems like your views are very liberal and not conservative. It seems like, and they went on. And I had to kind of look and say, wow, this is pretty honest. Now, some of them, of course, are the outliers, and you have to decide if you want to ignore it or not, but I do a lot of reflection. And every year I've done this, and I had 37, 38 faults. They go down to 36, they go down to 32. I'm probably about 28 faults. That number will get lower and lower. I'm on a consistent improvement plan for myself, which I will never actually get to a place where I'm free of faults. But I want to know how many teachers, students, and parents put themselves on that same improvement plan. So once again, I like to ask that if we have students evaluated all the time, why do we not have parents, students, and teachers evaluated all the time? If not, we're not just going to have a nation of teacups, we're going to have future generations of teacups, and we're all going to be so fragile that we'll never make progress. Thank you.